guys. This is Stephanie. This is Table for Four, a family conversation podcast. And I am super excited. I have a special guest, a fellow podcaster, Gabrielle, who's from the Hot Topic podcast. And we're going to be talking about mental health. We're going to be talking about education and the services that she's been providing. So I'm super excited to talk with her. And I just want to give you a little bit of an introduction. We basically met up each other on Facebook and we happened to talk to each other, and we were looking for find a guest and be a guest. So this great connection that we were able to get ended up having us on each other's podcast. So I'm super excited for this opportunity. I just want to talk a little bit more about Gabrielle. Gabrielle has been super busy. She has been up to so many things along with her tutoring business, a Steps Ahead tutoring services that she offers. And she has been another podcaster, getting out there, doing the videos, doing the recordings. So you know that she's been super, super busy. I want to welcome everybody to Gabrielle. Hey, Gabrielle, how are you today?
I'm well. How are you doing?
Doing well. Not too bad. I know last week was a heat wave and the weather's been a little bit more tolerable. So yes, definitely. So I'm happy about that.
Yes. Me too. It's definitely been crazy.
Yeah, it's been definitely a little bit crazy, but I want to go right into it. And I want to talk a little bit about your experience. How has it been for you with this business? Let's talk about mental health. Let's talk about education. Let's talk about everything. So let's start. Tell us about how did the services start beginning?
All right. Well, it all started in college. So I had a work study grant, and I don't like to waste free money.
Who does
I
it?
had to so I had to find a job on campus in order to spend it. And I saw there was a couple of after school programs that were looking for tutors. So I thought, hey, I'm a bright kid. I'm a
I got some
whippersnapper.
talents. I've got some talents.
I got some oomph. Yeah, I could tutor some kids. Why not? So I went for that and I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot in that job, and that there's the homework help, of course, but there's also you're building rapport, you're establishing relationships, you're talking about their problems. These are high school students who happen to be in foster care. So it is a lot that went into tutoring them. It wasn't just improving their grades, it's also their mental health, their well-being. So all those are interconnected, and that idea of everything is interwoven and interconnected, that mentality I bring into my business as well. But before we got there, I did a couple of other after school tutoring programs after that. And then I worked for two other companies after that. And then I decided to go into tutoring privately. And then I just thought full-blown business with hiring people and doing taxes. I took the leap of faith. And there was a small business conference that I went to at my church, and they were talking about starting a business. And I was there for something completely different. But then in listening to the speaker, I was inspired, and starting my own business was always in my heart and in my mind. And so I just took a leap of faith, and that was almost 9 years ago. And here I am today.
So with trying to build your own business, I know that must have been tough on itself, but I mean, the passion that you have just with all the different background that you've had. You said you studied psychology at Temple University, and you also studied clinical mental health counseling at St. John's as well. So you have a huge amount of experience that would help you lean towards gaining that experience and being helpful in your own business. So I commend you for that, because I was a tutor myself in college. I knew that wherever I can get help or wherever I can give help, I want to be of service. So that's always something that I've been super interested in doing. But as far as seeing what happened 9 years ago till now, can you see the growth? Can you see the progression from one time to another?
Yeah, I do. I think because When I started, I made all the wrong decisions, particularly when it came to money.
Don't we all? Don't we?
Especially when it came to money, I spent personal savings. I went into debt. I made a lot of decisions that I wish I never did. And just in realizing that you don't need a lot of money really to start a business. You just need, not to say that you don't need any money. There is some financial investment, but you don't really need a lot of it. And it's just drive. You just need drive and patience and convenience. And so I spent way more money than I should have. And I got myself into way more debt than I should have, which is, it took the pandemic a couple of years ago just to resolve it. So that's how bad I got. But in terms of progression, it's as the years went by and I was figuring things out and making multiple mistakes along the way, and spending way more money than I should have, I realized that some things are not really necessary. And there are things that I can do for free or low cost in order to reach the same goal. So it's like I did a virtual office, which wasn't necessary because I work out of my home. I don't really want people knowing where I live, but there's ways around that, which I found out later in the game. I was starting a website. There's things that you could do for free with that. And you can start a blog. That's what I did. I started a blog. I think I did a blog for like 3 or 4 years. And then I got to a point where I said, I'm going to actually invest in a real website. And so,
right.
And so that's what I did. So in terms of there's growing as an entrepreneur, I learned that all the things that I did in maybe the first 3 or 4 years, I didn't really need to do. But of course, there's no way for me to have known that, back then. So everything is a learning experience. So in terms of progression, I realized that I could still reach my entrepreneurial goals without spending all this money. There's things that I could do for free. There's things that are low cost. And I feel like the more that I grew as an entrepreneur, the more I attempted to save my money because now that I'm realizing there's things I don't really need to do financially, that money can go elsewhere and I can use that to build my brand. So I've figured that out as the years went by, as I've learned from other entrepreneurs, as all the workshops that I attended. And a lot of it was just me figuring things out on my own and just coming to self-realization that just things that will be better. And like, you always have to be adaptable to change because things always change. Like I never thought I would do a podcast. I never thought I would start a podcast. And yet here I am. So it always be adaptable to change and just thinking about what are ways to evolve your business and ways to go with the constant flow of time and changes in society and all that. And even with the pandemic, all my tutoring was in person. And then with the pandemic, it just forced us online.
Yep.
And now it's, how do we navigate that? And so now that we're in Zoom world, I think we're doing more virtual workshops and virtual sessions. We're still doing some in person. And now I'm hosting a virtual internship, which is pretty cool. So I think in terms of progression, it's moving your business along with the changing of time.
Absolutely.
And
right.
As society changes, so should your business. And it's constantly adapting to the ever-changing society that we're in now. So I think just putting my business in a way that it'll constantly adapt, that is one of the realizations that I found out too late, but eventually I adapted to anyway. So finding better ways to use my money financially, that's one type of progression. And then it's putting your business in a way that will constantly adapt with society. I think that's another thing of progression, and being in a place where you are constantly adapting and you're constantly growing and never stop learning.
You can't never stop learning. Yep.
Yeah, never stop learning. Yeah. And that's how I think you'll make it as an entrepreneur.
I love the fact that you took your experience and you made it into a podcast, because it's so interesting to use the mistakes that you made, however we made along the way. You use that to your advantage to making the podcast. And I think that's even more of a better reason to do it, just to try to educate others and say, hey, listen, this is what I did. I highly suggest you don't do that. So I think it's great that you've been able to use your educational background and to use that for your podcast. And then I've had the chance to look at so many other podcasts and so many different niches and so many different topics that you sometimes go on podcast overload, but I can't get enough of it though. Like, I'm grateful for that. And I love that we can cater to anything that anybody can think of and any interest. So with the progression, like you said, to society, we now are living in a virtual world. So we're talking from NFTs, we're talking about working at home business, virtual internships. I've never heard of a virtual internship before, but I think it's amazing. So these things with the progression, you got to keep up with the times. And I think the same thing goes with education. So I guess my next question to you, what is the idea or what's the importance of tutoring services in general, whether you can provide them in person or virtually?
Yeah, I think what I tend to see often is that what kids are learning in school is not what the parents learned. So there's that adaptability again. There's
the generational gap.
Adaptability to
what kind of math is this? I don't recognize this math. Use your fingers. I don't know.
So as time changes, the correct schools change, right? So I say that because this is something that I constantly see. Tutoring is the last resort.
But why does it have to be though? That's the question.
I think it's a money thing. Any way to save money, I feel like parents will do. And then another thing is, I think, is a sense of pride in that.
Oh, like, I wasn't even thinking it that way.
I can help my kid. I don't want anyone else helping my kid.
Right,
I can help my kid. I know what my kid wants. So I think it's money and pride.
Gotcha.
And then tutoring is the last resort. So by the time they get the tutoring, it's usually the parent is frustrated because the kid is not listening to them, and the parent is trying to be a teacher and the parent, but the kid only sees the parent.
Right.
So the parent is trying to be a teacher, but then they get frustrated, and so they react as a parent as opposed to a teacher.
Right.
And so there's all these clashes, and then the parent just says, you know what, I give up. I need outside help.
Right.
So I think that's where tutoring steps in. Is I think it's to help parents. They don't feel like learning a whole new math. Like, and it's what they know is what they know, and a whole new thing, they're not going to do that. They're busy with all these other things, and so sometimes you need a third party to step in. So it's sort of like a mediator. It's two people that they're not finding any resolution. And so sometimes you need a third person,
right.
A third person, a neutral party to come in and work things out. So in terms of the importance of tutoring services, I think because of schools keep changing their curriculum, and they constantly change it like every 2 to 3 years. And tutors are aware of all these changes, and parents are too busy. And it's also, which is, again, with sometimes the kid doesn't want to listen to the parent. And so they need that other person to come in.
Right, to step in.
So I think to step in, yeah. So Tutoring comes in usually when the parents don't really have the time to learn a whole new type of math, or they keep arguing with the kid
Right.
and they just get frustrated very quickly, and they have their own frustrations to deal with, and then the kid is getting frustrated, and it's just all kind of collecting on each other. And so that's where the tutoring services come in to kind of neutralize the situation and to help the kid move along. So I think tutoring is that outside party, that neutral party, that mediator, so to speak, that parents can go to neutralize a very difficult situation, which is the parents and the kids are constantly arguing and the kids not understanding what's going on in school because the teacher is not teaching it or the kid's not understanding it. Or which another thing is the kid has a learning disability and they're just not getting it for whatever reason. And the parents don't really want to deal with the disability or they don't want to admit that there's a disability.
That's where
So,
pride comes in
that's where the
again.
third,
When you mention
yeah,
pride,
so
yeah, yeah.
so that's where the third party comes in and kind of resolve the situation.
And what is your opinion on the when you think about the different disabilities and learning disabilities that they might have not recognized or they might have been misdiagnosed? How do you have the type of information to recognize that there is something? Because sometimes there might be a miscommunication or if there's a misconnect or disconnect saying that maybe the child needs an IP or however they need in order to get the services that they need. Because I know sometimes, I know myself, I've been told many times that my child needed services and this and this. And I think, again, pride got in the way. And I was like, oh, my child doesn't need that and doesn't need this. But then when speaking to a third party, they were like, okay, let's look at this at a different way. And let's look at all the evidence and see what we can take it from here. And listening to another person, kind of like, okay, that makes sense. So, how is it that you can bring to the table and say, hey, this is what we are offering. This is how we can help you.
Yeah. So I think every tutor is different to let the tutors address that in their own way. But I will speak for myself personally as a tutor. I guess I usually start with something generic. So I find out what grade level they're on, what are the difficulties, and then I start with the generic understanding of their grade. So I know I can speak for New York State in that we use what's called the Common Core curriculum, which is there's certain markers that you have to meet for every grade. So if it's determined that the student is not meeting certain markers, then that's how they know that they're behind. Something like I'm trying to think. So like this one student that I'm working with, she's in the 5th grade, but she doesn't know how to multiply. She doesn't know how to divide. So something like that, she's not meeting a marker or a 5th grader. So that puts her behind, that puts her on the 3rd grade level. And even with her, I mean, I'm not sure if she's been officially diagnosed. And I know that no, because the mom brought it to my attention that she has ADHD. And I noticed in working with her, like I have to simplify things for her. And it's a lot of like pictures and just using a lot of charts, like the simple rote memorization won't work for her like I usually do. It's okay, now I have to use a lot of computer activities and I have to use a lot of tell her to look at so it's challenging there in that what I'm used to doing, which is the regular tutoring, studying, practicing, I have to break it down even simpler for this one with ADHD. And I mean, the mom did bring it to my attention, but little things that I pick up. So again, if someone is if they don't meet certain markers determined by a grade level, that's how we know that they're behind. Even something like if you're 6 and 7 years old and you're having trouble, you don't know how to pronounce small words, like something like that is a concern. So there's the meeting certain markers for your grade level. That's one of the things that we like to pay attention to. And it's also, in terms of disabilities, it's the way that they process the information. And you won't really know that until you get into it. So if you find yourself explaining things over and over again, or they're taking a long time to understand what you're saying, you tell them, okay, do this, and they're not doing that, or they're doing the opposite, or they're reading the words backwards. When it comes to diagnosing a disability, which we don't do, we're not doctors.
Right.
But there's normal functioning, and then there's impeding normal functioning.
Right.
Something like if you're taking too long to answer questions, there's a normal speed and then there's an abnormal speed. So if we find that you're taking too long to answer a question, or you get constantly distracted and we have to keep redirecting you to the task, so there's normal distraction, and then there's concerning distraction. And if it's multiple factors all happening at the same time, then that is a suspicion that, okay, there might be something here. So it's all that is observation. It's working with the student. It's, again, seeing where their markers are in terms of their grade level. And it's how quickly can they process information, how quickly can they replicate information, and how is there multiple things going on at the same time. That's a concern in terms of a learning disability, or it may not necessarily be a disability. It might just be a mental health issue. So it might be anxiety, it might be depression, when the student is constantly worried and they give up quickly because they're afraid of getting something wrong. And so they just give up. And that can easily just be anxiety. That can be depression. So not necessarily a disability. So it's things that we observe as we facilitate the tutoring sessions. And there's normal and then there's abnormal. So there's a threshold there. And when we find that, okay, this is abnormal, something is not right here, something is a concern, we're suspecting something is going on here, then something like that we would bring it up to the parents, and it's up to the parents to decide what they want to do with that information. But I usually, in my initial assessment, when the parents come in and they request tutoring, I usually ask, like, has your child been evaluated for any disabilities? Because it will come up at some point or another. So,
but don't you see the challenge? Like, from my understanding, not only are you supposed to observe them and see if they're having difficulties answering questions, if they're taking too long, if they're not meeting those benchmarks, how much of a challenge is it during the pandemic that some of the services for children that might have a disability or other ailments to them to kind of prevent them from the get? How much of a challenge virtually and with the pandemic? How much was that of a challenge just to provide those services?
Yeah, that was even more of a challenge. I think that was worse because a lot, particularly it's two ways. In terms of the pandemic, I think that it favored older students.
For sure.
Middle school and up.
Right, because if you were in pre-K or 3K or 2K, how difficult was it to keep the attention of a 3-year-old over the computer that they don't know how to set up themselves?
Yeah, so someone has to set it up for them. Someone has to get them on an iPad. Yeah, I find that the virtual learning, it favored older kids. And in terms of, so it was good for older kids. So in terms of the younger kids, I find that with virtual learning, you really have to be independent and you have to be trustworthy. So when it comes to younger kids, like they're more likely not going to tell their parents, like, hey, I need to get on, it's tutoring. It's usually the
Oh, they're
parents
not
that
gonna
have to
say that.
remember, like, oh, it's tutoring, it's time to get on,
No,
you
they're not
know?
gonna know that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So it's usually like the older kids in high school that are like, okay, I'm going to get on, or you may have to just remind them here and there. But in terms of with disabilities, I see it two ways. I'm such a two-way person. I see it two ways because I think it favored some disabilities and not others. So someone with ADHD, for example, but I would say if they're older with ADHD, I think it favored them because you're on the computer more and you're using a lot of computer resources and you're not writing with your hands, you're typing, and it's a lot more vivid in terms of colors, and you get to use your phone, and you have to take pictures with your phone and upload things. And so I think in terms of maybe older kids with ADHD, for example, if things are on a computer more, they have more command of things and it might be easier to learn. And especially if all they have to do is just turn on Zoom, and it's simpler. And maybe older kids with anxiety, for example, you don't have to be around a lot of people. You're kind of by yourself, or even if it's a lot of kids on the screen, you're physically by yourself. So I think, excuse me, I think it favored some, it favored in terms of the virtual learning, it favored some disability, but I think others, something like an intellectual disability or dyslexia, I think those are harder. Like that one, you need more hands on. That one, you need more oversight. That one, you really have to be on top of kids. So even something like dyscalculia, you really have to be on top of them more. And it's difficult for them to be independent. So I think it worked for some and not for others. That's basically what I'm trying to say. But I think if we look at it as a whole, yes, it's worse for people with disabilities because they need more attention and they need more hands-on learning. They need someone over them, on top of them. Even
Right,
kids
right.
with HD, you got to get their attention. But I think that's as a whole. But I think in terms of individually, I think it did favor some disabilities than others.
It's such a difficult thing when it comes to trying to figure out how do we get over this hump? How do we go over the challenges? And you were able to still provide services, whether if it was in person or virtually, and still being able to maintain some sort of leniency or, like you mentioned before, adaptability, because that's something you really got to have in this type of business when it comes to
Yeah.
education. But you mentioned something before that certain students that might suffer from anxiety or depression, how
Yeah.
do you think that whole mental health was affected in terms of socialization and the capacity to learn on top of the pandemic and with everything else that's a challenge with virtual learning?
Yeah, yeah. So again, I think it favored some and not others. In terms of mental health as a whole, collectively, I think it made things worse because they're cut off from their friends, they're by themselves, they're stuck at home, maybe
Yeah.
with parents that they don't like, and the parents are stuck at home too because they have to work at home, or they're essential workers and they're forced to work. So there
Yeah, that
may
was
not
my
be.
case. Yeah, that was my
Yeah,
case. I was an essential worker and I had to continue working. So I had to
yeah,
unfortunately, I was laid off because they had to close down the clinics and close down the facilities. So then I end up staying home anyway. So it's just like, but under those difficult circumstances with parents that had to stay home and work, I can't even, well, I can
yeah.
because I had to do it.
Yeah, and so I think in terms of mental health, I think I heard somewhere that the suicide rates among teenagers like doubled or tripled or something like that during the pandemic. And it's a daunting fact, I think, just because they're not able to socialize with their friends and they're stuck at home. They're stuck at home with their parents that might be nagging them, and everything's on a computer. And then it's worse if you're low income and that you have to do everything from an iPad, and the Wi-Fi it may be going in and out. And so you have Wi-Fi problems. And so you may not be able to go to class online because the Wi-Fi don't want to work. And then all the things are just closing around you. You have parks that are closing. You have movie theaters that are closing, malls that are closing. Everything is just closing around you. And your life just stops at an instant. That can break a child. And it's one thing for adults to be depressed. Imagine a teenager, imagine a child, and then even telling a 5-year-old, you can't hang out with your friends because there's a disease and I don't want you to get sick. And so I'm keeping you away from your friends. Like that's worse for a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old who may not understand
They
what's
might not
going
understand.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, why can't I play with my friends? Oh, there's people, I don't want you to get sick. So it's when you have someone that's under 6 years old that they learn through play and they understand playing and connecting with others, and all of a sudden just cutting them off, that can take a toll. And now they're not going to school, and mommy or daddy is always out, or mommy and daddy is always home. And all of these things are just collapsing all at once. And imagine that for a 3-year-old.
That must have been so difficult just to even think about that. And what you mentioned before that, which is really interesting, there was an episode that I saw on Hot Topic with, I guess, Natifa Lewis. And she made some great, fantastic points about talking about the lack of resources and access. Like you mentioned before, maybe they might have difficulty with Wi-Fi, or they might not even have a computer. A lot of the assumptions that were made. And she had some great points talking about some of the disadvantages. So we're not even talking about the disadvantages when you get to school. So now you're home. Now you even have a whole other set of disadvantages when you're home. She had so many great points, and I really enjoyed watching that episode with you guys because she really hit it on the nose, just highlighting all the disadvantages and just the social disparity and the social isolation. And how is it that you feel about mental health? Now, you mentioned before that the rates for suicide and for teenagers and for adults went up 3 times now. Again, with on top of the deaths, and myself being an essential worker, I saw the deaths myself. I knew many people that were RNs that were at the height of the pandemic and they were out in the field, and it was a lot for them to come home to that and then come home to their kids to that. So it's so many different factors. Oh, so many things happen at that time. But how do you play that hand in hand with counseling? I know that you mentioned that you not only offer services for tutoring, but can you see yourself being a counselor going hand to hand with those services?
Well, I've incorporated those skills into my tutoring services because before I was saying like everything is interwoven with each other. And so if a 5-year-old hasn't seen her friend in like 6 months and the 5-year-old's been isolated, and you have to tutor this 5-year-old who doesn't want to do their homework. And the parents might be frustrated because all their homework is on Google Classroom and they don't understand that. And I still don't understand that. And and even the parents are just like, I have no idea. And then the kid has homework, but they don't want to do their homework because technology, I think we're in a technological age. So I think kids can pick up technology quickly, but but they don't want to do it because they haven't seen their friend their best friend in like 6 months, or the only way they see their friend is on Zoom.
Right, right.
So it's, when it comes to tutoring, you're going to hit those walls. And as a tutor, you have to break down those walls. I mean, to be poetic, but you have to break down those walls. And it's like, if I'm just saying 5-year-old, for example, but if a 5-year-old doesn't want to read because they're sad, they're not going to read.
They're not going to read.
Yeah, so you have to address that. Okay, we have a wall right now. Let's talk about that. Oh, I haven't seen my friends. And you have to address that somehow. And it's, all right, I know it's tough, and it's like you have to give them hope pretty much. Like this is only temporary. You know, there's a disease out there, and we have to keep everybody away from each other. You know, I know it's tough. I know it's a lot to deal with right now. We don't have to do all of this now. Maybe we'll do a little bit. You don't want to answer 10 questions? That's fine. Let's see if we can get through 1. Let's see if we can get through 2. Let's see if we can get to 3. Okay, you're doing good. You're doing good. And I think it's chipping away at that wall bit by bit. And you're also acknowledging their feelings. So that's one of the counseling skills, is you have to acknowledge those feelings, right? I know you're sad. I know you're angry. So and finding solutions, of course. So let's take this big thing and break it down into smaller things. And let's do 1 question. Let's do 2 questions. Let's take a little break. You get to play with your toys, and so things that make them happy, and finding those things that make them happy that they can do for like 2 minutes or something. So you won't be able to do your job when something else is in the way.
Right, right.
So it's sort of like driving. I can't go to where I want to go because there's trash in the street. And so I have to move the street in order to drive to where I want to go. And so you can't work with anyone if they're shut down. And it's worse when they're young, and they may not understand. They may not understand that they're angry, or they may not understand that they're sad. And so it's maybe not saying the word angry or sad, or even just describing their behaviors. So something like, oh, you just want to punch a pillow, right? Or you just want to stay in your room and not talk to anybody. And and just encouraging them. Like, you always want to encourage, always, even if it's a little bit at a time. So I was like, I know they may not understand. Again, I'm talking younger kids, that they may not understand that they're sad, but they want to keep to themselves, or sitting in a corner by themselves. They're not playing with their toys. They're things like that. That's like, I know you're not playing with your toys right now, and hey, let's get through this one problem, and oh, you're doing good. And you always want to reinforce, like, oh, you're doing good. Keep at it. You're doing a great job. You're getting past this. That's good. That's good. You always want to give praise. You don't want to overpraise, but you want to acknowledge those good behavior. So that's positive reinforcement. That's another counseling skill.
Another counseling skill.
Right? It's positive reinforcement. It's reflection. It's paraphrasing. It's just observing their behavior. It's explaining things. It's encouraging. All of these things are counseling skills, and all of these things are skills that counselors are taught. When it comes to younger kids, I know, again, I'm still sticking with the younger kids. I find that older kids, they're easier to address. But with the younger kids, that I think they feel the most depressed and sad, especially during a pandemic. And again, they may not understand these feelings, but you see the behavior. And so you point out the behavior and say, hey, I saw that you broke a toy. What happened? Oh, I wanted to just break it. see you punching a pillow. I see you punching a wall. You yelled at your mom. So it's things that you can tell that they're angry. And hey, I know you just want to scream at somebody right now, but let's take a break. Let's take a moment. Let's do a little bit here and there. And I think you want to chip at that wall as you want to chip at it a little bit at a time, I think. So I know I'm all over the place with my answers, but
No, not at
what
all.
I'm trying to say is that
No, not at all.
sorry, I'm like, I tend to be all over the place, but basically it's you can't do your job if something is blocking you from doing something is blocking you, and you have to address it. And like the saying, you have to address the elephant in the room. Like you have to address it,
Right.
and you don't have a choice. So if the kid doesn't want to read because they're sad because they haven't seen their best friend in 6 months, and they can't go to their favorite park because it's closed, and they can't go to a movie theater because it's closed, and everything is closed around you, and then you have mommy and daddy are always out, or mommy and daddy are always home, and mommy and daddy are always angry. Mommy and daddy just got laid off, and they see that, and so they reflect what they see. You gotta adjust that, and you gotta adjust that. I'm not saying like take the whole session, but even because you don't got time for that. There's also the time. There's also time. Like a lot of these sessions tend to be an hour long, and so it's like, let's take 2 minutes, let's take 3 minutes, and then it's like, all right, let's read one paragraph today. I know things are tough right now. Let's do a little bit at a time. Take that one big homework assignment and let's break it up into 3 and 4 tiny assignments. And then you always encourage, hey, you're doing great. Keep up the good work. And you always want to push. Okay, we did one paragraph. Let's see if we can do another paragraph. Okay, you're doing great. Hey, you make mistakes. You didn't fail. You're not stupid. You want to be cognizant of the words that they tell themselves.
Right.
Whenever they're feeling frustrated. Oh, I'm stupid. I'm an idiot. You want to be cognizant of that as well and say, no, you're not. You're figuring things out. You made a mistake. That's okay. You can correct it. That's why we work with a pencil. You can always erase. Even if you write with a pen, that's okay. You could cross it out and start over. You learn from the mistakes that you did. So all that to say is that all these are counseling skills that we apply in our sessions. So you're reflecting emotions, you're paraphrasing the things that they say, you're observing behaviors, you're pointing out behaviors, you're encouraging, you're finding solutions. All of these are, and then you're consulting with, especially for younger kids, you always want, I forgot what it's called, but you're getting other people involved in the treatment. You get the parents involved, you get the teachers involved. So it's...
When you're tutoring, you're not just tutoring the student.
Yeah.
They come with a whole family, a whole string of other people.
Yeah, basically. It's all of that is counseling. All of that is you're getting background information. You have to learn about their school and what they're learning in school and how they're doing in school, and do they have any behavioral issues, and you're collecting like a psychosocial, and you're collecting all of that. If tutors are lucky enough to talk to the teachers, that's a big deal as well. So you're getting that collateral information on the student. And so all of that goes into counseling. You're talking to people outside about the child, you're gathering background information, and all that I said before about your reflecting emotions, and you're encouraging, and positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. What else? Did I say paraphrasing? I think
yes,
I said
did.
Paraphrasing. So all of that is counseling skills, and all of that goes into... It goes hand in hand with
tutoring. It does go hand in hand. Yeah. It seems like there's so many different components that come into just tutoring, like I mentioned before, you're not just tutoring the student, you're learning about their background. You're learning about, again, you mentioned before about social economics. And for myself, how does the coping mechanisms differ from our age generation till now? Like, I know that for us, we have different ways of coping as opposed to the younger kids now that you mentioned before, that there's different ways of expressing anger. They might not know they're depressed. They don't know. They're little. Different things that come into play. But how have you seen our coping mechanisms from our generation till the ones that you're currently working with now with the population that you're working with?
When it comes to, like, there's a whole list of coping mechanisms. I should have brought that with me, but I feel that in terms of coping, I find like the younger kids, they don't really cope well.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it's because they don't really know how to cope well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's something that has to be learned. I think in terms of, well, you're asking about like generations.
Yeah.
There's a couple of ways I see that. I think nowadays there's more talk about coping with anxiety, coping with anger, coping with sadness. So I think there's more acknowledgement of mental health and mental health issues, particularly with kids, compared
as
to
opposed
like
to before, like we didn't say anything, right?
Yeah. So
you
we
kept
just
everything
kept it
to
all
yourself.
bottled inside, and
Yep.
we just kept it all bottled inside, and we put our emotions into the job, and we worked more hours when we're angry. We stayed outside when we're angry, and particularly with boys, it was whenever they're angry, go play outside, go play football, go build something, go box, go play soccer. And maybe like with girls, like you're sad, like tough it up. It's a tough world out there. And people will take advantage of you if you're sad because you're looked at as weak. That was maybe like 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Right.
But I think now we're acknowledging that it's okay to feel emotions and it's okay to cry. And especially with boys, it's okay to cry. I hate to go there, but with school shootings, it's who are the people doing the shooting? It's 16 to 24-year-old boys.
That demographic. Yep.
Yeah, that demographic. And you do the background information. They've been bullied. They've been abused. They have all this anger inside and they're not coping well. And they have all this anger, but they're not letting it out in a healthy manner. And
it's
so
not constructive. Yeah.
It bottles up all inside. That's one. Then you have systemic issues on top of that, which is, well, the schools are not really helping them. And then easy access to guns, and then boom, that's how we get it. But all that to say, I think there's more conversation about coping mechanisms. There's more strategies that are put out there into the world. And I think that's what this generation is getting now, as opposed to my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, and especially myself coming from an immigrant family who really don't talk about mental health.
No, you don't.
I think it's worse with immigrant families. So
for sure.
I think you really don't talk about it. And if you don't talk about coping, and if you're angry, deal with it. Like with boys, if boys are angry, you go do something physical. And if girls are angry, suck it up, deal with it, because this is a tough world. And you're a girl and you could easily be snatched up and raped. And so you gotta be tough.
Right.
It's always like, do something physical. If it's a boy and if it's a girl, suck it up because it's a dangerous world and you'll be eaten alive because you're a girl.
Right. I feel like even with gender and with the whole conversation opening up, that there's always a misconception that if you are this particular gender, that this is how and you should behave. But it gets to be such a complex issue. And I have to have you come on another episode and talk about the different issues and things that related to that, because it's another can of worms.
Yeah,
you can't even,
don't have time for
you
right
don't even
now.
have time for that right now. But Gabrielle, I really appreciate you taking the time and talking with me today. I had such an amazing time with you. I know that your job is selfless. You cannot put a value to the teachers and to all the additional services that are coming with helping children that need that extra help, and even recognizing it, because that in itself, it's a walk up a hill, treading up and trying to get as much information and as much resources together to provide the services that you can to those who need it. And it was an absolute pleasure talking with you. I don't want you to forget, guys, don't forget to follow Gabrielle at Steps Ahead tutoringservices.com. And she also has this amazing podcast, Hot Topic Podcast, which I'm going to be featured on today. So that's going to be super, super exciting. And you can also find her on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Eventbrite. But guys, again, you can follow her and connect with her website at www.astepsaheadtutoringservices.com. And you can follow us, Table for Four, a family conversation, a sit down with Stef segment, and you can follow us on all the social platforms. Guys, I had an amazing time, and we'll see you on the next episode. Have a good one. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.